35th chapter, verses 16 through 18. Would like to use that as a jumping point for this word. Genesis chapter 35, verses 16 through 18. I will be reading from the New King James translation of the scriptures, the Septuagint, which is the Greek scriptures, which is translated from the Hebrew scriptures, and we will read that today. Genesis 35, 16 through 18. Hear ye the word of the Lord. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass, when she was in hard labor, that the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, you will have this son also." And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. She called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. Used as a subject, the Benoni complex. The Benoni complex. I know Johanse, and I know the Murray sons, and I know the pastor, and I know the first lady. And so I know they serve as a powerful example of what it's like to raise healthy African-American men. We are blessed here to have that example, and in many places, I have to be honest, there is no example. In many places, there aren't many examples of men who stand with integrity, men who stand upon the shoulders of men who have accomplished great things. In many places, it's just the opposite. It's a place where there is no strength, where there is no deliverance, a place where there is nothing but internalized oppression, a place where there is problems. I am the product of that. I used to be embarrassed about my story, but God said, you came through that because I wanted you to be that, and I wanted you to use that. I told the men on yesterday, my father was my pastor when I was a young man. He was a military man, a striking man, 6'4", dark complected. He was somebody. I used to love to walk down the street and walk there holding his hand as we walked to his church to hear him preach and hear him teach. When I was 7 years old, it was my father's teaching that I heard the Lord and I saw the Lord and I accepted the Lord. It was his teaching that showed me that you could be somebody. But for some reason, because of the mental illness, because of the oppression, because of the despair, my proud father fell that same year. My father, who had been my hero, became my oppressor. My father, who had made me feel safe, became the man who made me feel unsafe. My father, who had been the man that I looked up to, became the man that I would run from. And I must say that the abuse he perpetrated upon me wound up causing me to dislike myself. So much so that I felt when I would reach the age of maturity, I would go to the surgeon and immediately have this nose that just like him cut off my face. I told the men yesterday that I'm not ashamed of this, but my brother dropped out of school in the 9th grade. Like Brother Logan, I received a scholarship in the 9th grade, and I went to an engineering school. My brother went to the streets. Because my dad had left us, my brother decided he would become a drug dealer. Because my father had left us, my brother decided to become a pimp. Because my father left us when I was 17, I graduated and went to the university. My brother graduated and went to prison. He murdered a man, and he still sits there now to this very day. We need some men who are not ashamed of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need some men who can recognize that no matter what besets me, no matter what stands before me, no matter what comes against me, I'm going to stand because there's a God that is able. But we are too often frustrated by anger. We're too often bothered by painful memories. We're too bothered and too perplexed by what we've gone through to be the men God has called us to be. Remember when I got to the university, and my counselor told me that because I came from a black school in Detroit, Michigan, and my scores were not as high as others in my class, I would never graduate from the University of Michigan. I remember things that happened, and I was too ashamed to mention that you don't understand where I've come from. You don't know what I've been through. But because you don't know my story, you're going to tell me my projection. I was in a study when I was in undergrad by Claude Steele. He studied us, man. He said that he found that those of us of color in that study, that we were smart like everybody else. But every time the concept of race was mentioned, we would become stereotypically vulnerable. Every time they mentioned that it was an issue where black folk didn't do well, when we just heard that, we immediately did less than and poorer than our counterparts. He found out that there was something going on where you could take a person who was proud and take a person who was strong and take a person who had been nurtured in First Baptist Church, but when you told them that black folk don't do good, women don't do good, men don't do good, they immediately become to succumb to this particular philosophy and they don't do what they should do or how they could do. I learned this word called cognitive dissonance. That's where I think one thing, but I do another. I feel one way, but because of the perplexities in my being, I'm not able to do what I want to do. In this text, a young man is being born. And because of the complications in his mother, because of the sociological situation he's being born into, he has nothing to do with it. He's just coming into life. And she names him Benoni, son of my sorrow. She says, I'm going to rename you now. I'm going to set your trajectory. I'm going to set your life perspective right now at your birth. You will be nothing but a son of sorrow. How many of us today are where we are because somebody else named us? How many of us are where we are today because somebody else chose to limit our possibility? How many of us are here today because somebody else decided to say, you're not going to be what you could be, you're going to be what I think you are? There's a book out called Slavery by Another Name. It talks about the fact that down in the South where we are, but a little deeper, that after the Emancipation Proclamation was proclaimed by Abraham Lincoln and people of color were set free from slavery, that they devised a not just Jim Crow concept. See, we know about these things, but sometimes we haven't heard these things. They had this thing called Jim Crow, but that wasn't the worst of it. But if you were a man of color, if you just walked down the street wrong, the sheriff could come to you and say, you just are loitering. Because you were loitering on the street, they could put a charge up against you and put a fine against you. And then you weren't able to pay the fine, you would then be put into jail. If you couldn't pay the fine, you then got sold to the white man who came to pay your fine. And you wound up in a mine working for the rest of your life and you never seen again. You know how it was. We look up one day and Uncle Johnny was gone. He didn't just get lost, somebody stole him. And we've got so many things, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm just a reality person. I recognize that there's some things that go on. I was so into the politics when President Obama was elected. But when that man stood up in the Congress and basically just disrespected him, I said right then and there, I don't care how high you go in this country, like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X would say, you still gonna be just a. And so we often live broken lives. We blame ourselves and we blame others. We blame our parents, we blame our schools, we blame our system, we blame slavery. But what reality is, we were named Benoni. Son of my sorrow. I love what Malcolm X said, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. And so I want to look at this thing today. How do we break? I believe God has given everybody who is called. Anybody here know Jesus? I believe God has given everybody who's called the ministry of breaking the chain. It's time to break some chains. It's time to set some people free. You know, I'm a close, but it was amazing. I was a PhD in psychology, still am, but sometimes I don't think so because folks don't believe it. Sit in the meeting with colleagues got the same degree I've got. Sit in meeting, I've done more training, I've been to more institutions, higher learning. I've studied at Harvard, I've studied at UCLA, I've studied at Howard University, I've studied at Hampton, but they will sit there and say, well, you know, because I was trained to be a university president. And when I came back from my training, the university told me that we don't want you back, stay where you are. And then I sat in the meeting with a bunch of colleagues, and they were like, well, how do you know? And I'm like, I'm the one in here that was trained. We stay sons of sorrow, broken, uncorrected, and stuck. One of the things that my brother told me one day, I was visiting him in prison. He said, Micah, there's no difference in us. When we were teenagers, we both did the same foolish things. If I can be very honest with you, I never looked down on my brother because when I was 16, I'm just being real today, I had endured what my father had done and I was too young to do anything about it. At 16, I was a football player, I was a martial artist, I was a boxer. I didn't have to take nobody's mess. And one day I walked into my house, and I still regret this, but it's just real. And if you don't invite me back, I understand. But I walked into my house, and this man who my mother was dating had the audacity to slap her in my presence. I had seen what my daddy had done to me and my mom, and I wasn't dealing with it then. And before I could get my behavior into control, I picked up a candle. I was a baseball player too. I picked up a candelabra and I just launched it. I then decided that the candle wasn't enough. I needed to also share my bat with him. And I'm not proud of this, but I hit him, and 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 I hit him, until somebody finally grabbed that insane, crazy man and pulled me away from him. I say that because my brother committed murder, but did I not do the same thing? And we look at stuff and we want to judge stuff, we want to condemn folk, but all of us have within us some sorrow because of what we've gone through. All of us have within us some pain that needs to be dealt with. All of us have some stuff in us that could cause us to commit things that are hideous, things that are atrocious, things that are painful. All of us. My brother said the only thing that saved you, man, was that you would not fully give over to the degradation in our community. And I say the only reason why I did not was because I remember at 7 years old when I saw that vision of Christ coming into my room and touching me. That no matter how far I wanted to go,
something held me from going all the way. And what God is saying is that we are people of sorrow, but there can be a change. Because what I like about the text was that the mother called him Benoni, but the text said his father called him Benjamin. See, we need some men right now who are not ashamed to go back in the room and say, you can call me what you want to, but I'm not going to allow you to mess up my son's life. I'm not going to allow you to mess up my church. I'm not going to allow you to mess up my pastor. But I think that not anybody could have gone back in there. It took a Jacob that was now Israel. See, we've got to recognize that I'm not able to walk in if I'm ashamed of what I was. I recognize I might have been called trickster. I might have been the one who held on to my brother's foot. I might have been the one who stopped my brother and stole his birthright. But I've been through something since then. I've walked through something since then. I've been with Laban. I've had to labor for 14 long years. I've changed. I wrestled with the angel. I've grappled with my life now, and I recognize what I used to be. I ain't ashamed of, but I ain't yet become what I'm going to be. And because he's done some things with me, I remember we were at church. We had only been pastoring for about 5 or 6 years. And one day I was in the pulpit preaching, and there was a phone call in the back of the church, and one of the trustees came out and said, Pastor, I got to interrupt you in the middle of the sermon. He said, the police are on the phone, and they said it's an emergency. They must speak to you right now. I stepped down from the pulpit and I went to the phone. And on the telephone, there was a young man by the name of Chance. And I had taught Chance martial arts for a few years, and I had begun to mentor him. And he said on the phone, he said, Doc, I'm sick and tired of this thing. He said, I feel my mama, he's only 10 years old, my mama beat me down so bad that I just can't go on any longer. He said, I'm either going to kill her or I'm going to kill myself. I said, hold on. Put the police back on the phone. I told the officer, I said, officer, take him to my house and just have him sit on the porch. He knows my house. He'll be all right till I get there. Went back to preaching, finished the sermon. I'm just like that. When we got home, I spoke to Chance, and he just said he couldn't go back. And I went in and had a family meeting with Pastor Jackie and Micah. And they said they loved Chance too, so he could stay for the weekend. He never left. That young man that was broken became our son. He stayed in our home and we raised him through high school. He went to the university and he finally just said, I can't take even the connection with my family. We let him meet his father and get to know his dad, and he got his dad's stuff straight. And then one day he said, I'm just going to enlist in the army. And I would say, I'm proud to say that I am the father of a soldier. Because that young man went on to the military, did 3 tours in the Iraq War, and is today stands as a hero for our country. But it took me knowing that God had changed me for me to be able to change him. And what God is saying to somebody, there's somebody in your community that needs you to change them. There's somebody in your community who needs you to stand for justice, stand for righteousness. The thing I like about it wasn't just that the father had to change. It's the name he gave his son. When he named him Benjamin. Benjamin means son of my right hand blessing. What he said was, I see that somebody's called you son of sorrow. I don't see sorrow because I've been through something. I see somebody's calling you son of pain and injustice. But I don't see pain and injustice, because I see what God can do. I saw that he sent his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. I saw that he sent him to a place called Bethlehem. And I heard somebody say, what good can come out of Nazareth? I saw him in that child. Let him grow up where folk questioned who he was. You could say he walked around with a gang of folk, hung out in places that they call graveyard. Folk didn't want him to do right because he healed somebody on the Sabbath day. Folk talked about him as sure as you're born, and he died by the name of Jesus. But I thank God when he died, God said, I'm going to rename him. He once was Jesus, but now he's Christ. He once was old, but now he's everlasting. He once was temporary, but now he's permanent. He once was, but now he's my lily of the valley. He's my bright and morning star. He's my wheel in the middle of a wheel. I know you know him. His name is Jesus. I thought about this thing. When you get a right hand blessing, it's something powerful. The other day, I was going through something. My mind was a little perplexed. I was hurting, just had a battle with trustees, had to move one of my offices, things going on. I was just struggling. I'm sitting in my house, just trying to find my right mind. And my little 25-year-old daughter came in the house. When she saw me, she just started crying. I said, Makita, what's wrong with you? She said, are you all right, Daddy? I said, I'm fine. She said, no. I'm sitting in the car. And before I came in, the Spirit just hit me and said, you need to start praying for your father, that your rock is going through something right now. And my child that I love stood there with tears in her eye, praying for her father. I thank God when you pour yourself into somebody as a right-hand blessing, you will look back one day and the person you poured into, that person will pour back into you. I'm so glad that God is able to put good folk where you need them. I just want to close with this. I was mentoring another young man in the church, working with him just recently. So I remember during this church picnic, I grabbed him and said, I need to go buy some horseshoes. Come with me and ride with me to the store. He's just that kind of a good young man. We're working and he's growing. But about 2 months ago, I get a phone call that he's been incarcerated. That this young man, like Brother Logan and Brother Alexander, was somebody that I knew could not do what he was accused of. He was accused of raping his step-niece, and it just wasn't in him to do it. So I went into prayer, called over to the penitentiary, and they told me that it was going to be a few weeks before I could come in and visit. And I just began to pray, Lord God, I can't get to him, but he's a right-hand blessing. And when I finally got there a couple weeks later, he said, I'm glad you came, Pastor. He said, but I don't understand it. There was another pastor who was incarcerated with me. I don't know if you heard me, but I ain't too happy about preachers who are in jail. But he said this preacher taught him how to have Bible study. This preacher taught him how to hold on when he felt like giving up. This preacher helped him see that God is able even when he's broken, I don't know if you hear me, but when you go through, God will put a right hand blessing right there where you're going through. When you're broke down, he'll send somebody. And I'm thankful to say that they had the little hearing where all the folks sit up and vote. They came back with a no truth clause. They said, ain't enough evidence to even convict this boy of being anything but a child of the Most High God. I'm here to tell you, if you walk right, he will bless you. If you love right, he will fix you. If you hold on, somebody said, weeping may endure for a night, but joy come in the morning. I heard somebody say, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now. But I like the part that says, through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come, but it was grace. Anybody know what I'm talking about? It was grace, amazing grace. It was grace that saved me, grace that changed me, grace that brought me, grace that kept me, grace that